Right, ladies and gentlemen, actually, I'll make this video with a heavy heart because according to the news, somebody that we know, and if you're on Twitter, you probably know him as well, has been killed. Now, in South Africa, that shouldn't come as a surprise, but the actual individual who's been killed is actually very well known, and he went by the very famous handle of Golan. Anyway, before I get onto the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please help me on my journey to 200,000 subscribers and subscribe to the channel. So, and if you're on Facebook, can you like the page and share it with some folks? Anyway, let's get on to the first news story. And I'm going to come back to the Golan story in a minute, but let's just start with the first news story. And that is that Cyril Ramaphosa, when he addressed an ANC Lekgotla in Boksburg, he warned of rising right-wing imperialism locally and globally. Now, he said that the ANC and the government must take appropriate action. Bear that in mind, appropriate action. What is appropriate action? I don't know. You can let me know. He did not specify any groups or any individuals, but it was clear that he's being flustered because of the right-wing imperialism, that's the United States, and the global organizations he's referring to are parties that are now siding with the United States, so probably Israel, and locally, well, that's very easy to understand. There's parties like myself, or the other right-wing social medias, obviously AfriForum and Solidarity, because those are the organizations exposing the ANC government. Now, Ramaphosa acknowledged declining trust in democratic institutions, corruption, waste, and governance failures. And he said that the security cluster was in a crisis, and that's because the security cluster, don't forget, is under his ambit, his control, doesn't actually do anything. They're all corrupt themselves. Now, he referenced findings before numerous commissions. We have the Zondo Commission, the State Capture Commissions. We now have the Police Capture Commissions and numerous committees into police corruption. And he says, well, the state's pretty much captured everywhere. And he stated that recommendations from many of these inquiries must be implemented. And this in itself becomes a question. You'd almost be forgiven to think Cyril's not the president of the country and his party isn't the one who's controlling everything. Because it's like me calling as leader of the opposition to implement all the outcomes of the inquiries when I can just sign that off with a pen stroke. But you see, those inquiries would incriminate himself and his organization, his much-loved ANC. Now, let's actually remember all of this, and let's actually go to Goolam. So Goolam, if that's how you say it, apparently he was linked to a Twitter account called GoolamV, and he has now been found dead in a hotel in Sante. Yes, so this guy was quite famous because he often exposed the ANC and numerous kind of factions in the ANC and things that they were doing. He seemed to have insider knowledge of what was going on in the ANC, and he was very critical of them, to the point where numerous individuals have said they really want to find out who he is and try to expose him. So the police confirmed that he's dead, and the matter's under investigation at the time of reporting. Now, media reports state that he had allegedly been served with court papers days before his death. Now, the court papers reportedly related to fraud, cyberbullying, hate speech, and defamatory publications. So they were targeting him directly for things that he was saying online. Now, his account has been active for years, and he's been accused by multiple individuals of targeting politicians, journalists, businessmen, and media figures, and publishing defamatory claims and personal attacks. Now, several politicians and journalists previously laid complaints against him, even though they didn't know who he was. They said that the police cluster basically needed to find out who he was and then to prosecute him. To give you an example, the former minister, Lindile Sisulu, was amongst those who had reportedly opened a case. Now, complaints had been registered with the SAPS, and this included allegations of basically hate speech and criminal injuria, so basically defamation-type cases, but no arrests had ever been made publicly prior to his death. Now, some reports described him as a political operator within ANC factional battles, and that's because he always seemed to know exactly what was going on with the ANC. He seemed to have an insider's knowledge, and that led many to say, well, maybe he was actually inside of them. Maybe he was running factional battles and he was releasing information to discredit one side or another. And he's being accused of running smear campaigns against figures such as Jacob Zuma, Zile Zuma, and Julius Malema. Now, other reports also claim that he defended or promoted narratives aligned with Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula. So they said that must have been the faction that he represented, and he was against like the RET faction. Now, analysts quoted in media say that the account appeared to shift political alignment over time. So the guy's actual political alignment was never really clear. He seemed to be on this side of the camp and then this side of the fence and then on that side of the fence. But reports allege that the account may have had access to sensitive political information, including cabinet-related details. And this is why he became quite controversial, because he was often leaking sensitive information around government ministers and the ANC infighting, if you want to call it that. And many said, well, who is this guy? Because they really just wanted to kind of keep him quiet. Now, claims had been made that the account's reach had been boosted by coordinated or automated amplification, though this was never independently confirmed. So they're saying that maybe he was being pushed on X and social media because of, I don't know, PSYOP or something, but no one could ever confirm it. Now, an opinion column issued in IOL, and it's amazing how many of these stories come back to IOL. Don't forget that both the Ramon Kabanek story and the Ronaldo Close stories were both stories pushed forward by IOL. IOL actually had to subsequently apologize to Ronaldo Close for doctoring his original videos and basically spearheading the campaign to destroy his political career. Now, this opinion piece had originally started arguing that this individual, this Golan individual, well, apparently he was spreading misinformation on social media, and so he should be criminally prosecuted. Now, independent media IOL stated that its legal division had pursued legal remedies relating to misinformation and defamation linked to that account. And so they went on an entire investigation against this individual, attempting to find out who he was. And subsequently, they did. Now, SAPS and the MPA stated that prosecution of this individual depended on the completion of investigations and submissions of the final dockets to them. So this idea that he's been charged, well, SAPS and the MPA aren't really sure about that. But what we are sure of is that the individual himself had been targeted by IOL, who had said very clearly they wanted to know who he is so that they could prosecute him for misinformation. They did subsequently find out who he is. They wrote a hit piece against him. And as of today, he has now, in very short timescales, been found dead. Now, ladies and gentlemen, not very good, but I can actually release some information relating to that individual because I have been given actual conversations that individual had with numerous sensitive individuals confirming exactly what he says was occurring with him. And he claimed that he had been threatened and that they had tried to push him off the road in an apparent attempted hit already. Apparently, he had a blockbuster allegation of an ex-ANC premier who had been implicated in the killing of a whistleblower, but because of the attempted assassination of the individual, once this all became known, he was now scared to actually post that story because now everybody knew who he was. He claimed that he now had security and that security was trying to look after him and keep him safe, and that apparently the head of IOL, Iqbal, had actually been involved in the investigations of him, and it was him that had specifically gone out to target him. Now, apparently, the IOL, and specifically Iqbal, had been dying to know his real name, and he claimed that he had actually messed up because he had allowed someone to come to a meeting, and that's how they had kind of got to know who he was. Allegedly, the person who was involved, who had kind of figured out who he was, had close links to Lessufi and was working with Iqbal to help Lessufi's political ambitions. I've got the screenshots. I can't share those because it would be a breach of confidentiality, and I've said to my source I wouldn't actually release them, but I've got the clips. This is what was occurring. So the individual knew full well that Iqbal IRL had been attempting to go after him, had exposed who he was, and now that they had exposed who he was, he's been found dead. Coincidence or not? You let me know what you think in the comment section below. But I know for myself, I think this was a political hit, and it's something that the ANC have clearly been involved in because the guy was very vocal online, and he was responsible for really naming and shaping very high-profile individuals. He was a bane in their side, and now he's dead. All this while Cyril Ramaphosa says, yep, right-wing extremists, we need to do something about them. Now, I'm reminded, because I'm not completely retarded, of Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered on the 29th of December, 1170, inside Canterbury Cathedral. Now, for those of you who don't know what happened on that occasion, Henry II had effectively said that this guy had become a thorn in his side, and he said, and I quote, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" And would you know it, 4 of his knights actually went to Thomas Becket, and they beheaded him, they killed him. And they took his head back to Henry II, who later said, "Why'd you do this?" And they said, "Well, you suggested you wanted somebody to get rid of him." And so we did. And he said, "Well, that's not what I meant." Well, it's pretty much what you said. And that story of Thomas Becket is a story that they talk of in Europe when they remind political leaders to be careful what you say in public, because you never know how your followers are going to interpret them. And so here you've got Cyril Ramaphosa saying, "Will somebody basically rid me of these turbulent right-wingers?" What do you think is going to happen, Cyril? Well, deaths like this are going to happen because you've got a big mouth and you don't think before you talk. This individual, as far as I'm concerned, this was a political hit. And it's a political hit for all of us to see. So let's move on to some other stories. And it's another story that my comment section have been asking me to comment on for ages. And it's the foot-and-mouth disease and the outbreak that's now occurring. Now, for those of you who don't know, South Africa is experiencing a foot-and-mouth disease outbreak. And it's affecting livestock. Now, Gauteng was reported as the hardest hit province. Now, the estimates are around 261,000 livestock have been affected in Gauteng, with 195 confirmed outbreaks in the province itself. Now, don't forget, this is all being done or looked after by the Agricultural Minister, which is being run by the DA's leader, John Steenhuisen. Now, the outbreak has effectively been linked to illegal movement of cattle from an infected area in KZN and transmitted via auctions and livestock transport. Now, the foot-and-mouth outbreak has been reported in 8 out of South Africa's provinces, and the disease affects hoof-cloven animals and not human health risks. Now, the Gauteng authorities reported that 286,000 vaccine doses have been administered, with an additional 90,000 doses now being ordered, and vaccines are being sourced from Argentina, Turkey, and Botswana. Now, viral samples have also been sent to the UK for strain matching, and the Gauteng has allocated around 16 million rand for vaccination logistics, testing, biosecurity measures, and mobile veterinary units. Affected farms have all been placed under strict quarantines, and movement controls and roadblocks have all been implemented in high-risk areas, and calls have been made for local vaccine manufacturing capacity, because again, still South Africa cannot manufacture its own vaccines. And there has been calls for an expanded role for the Agricultural Research Council. Now, farming groups have all challenged state monopoly control over vaccine procurement, saying that it's really the state's control over the procurement of these vaccines that has led to the slow implementation of vaccinations of these animals, which has caused the foot-and-mouth disease in the first place. And we are reminded that this could all be swiftly ended with a pen stroke from the Agricultural Minister, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. Now, in typical fashion, fake cures have all been circulating on social media online, on WhatsApp, with many claims saying that these medications that are being sold will cure foot-and-mouth disease. Many of them include just baking soda and citric acid sprays, which are being used on so-called infected cattle. Now, veterinarian experts say that there's no proven cure for foot-and-mouth disease, and such claims are pseudoscience and unverified. So what does this actually mean? Well, experts are warning around misinformation, which could delay outbreak reporting and increase the spread of disease, with products promoted being registered only as nutritional supplements rather than actual treatments. And again, this all comes from the fact that the state has complete monopoly on this, which means that people aren't very aware of what the alternative medications are. So what will this do to you and me? Well, meat prices are due to increase quite significantly, with meat prices having already risen around 12.6% year on year. Beef prices alone have risen around 21%. Economists are warning that high meat prices could persist for at least 3 months, with estimated revenue losses nationally being around 5.6 billion rand. Which means that on the braai increase, you are expecting to see an overall price increase on the basket according to meat prices, all thanks to the outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease. Not a good time to be a DA leader of, well, the agriculture minister now, is it? And many individuals are looking at the job that John Steenhuisen is doing and saying, it's just not very good. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's the news. I'm really not going to talk about the other topics today. We'll leave those for tomorrow. And as per usual, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.